What if the very thing that's killing you is also the only thing that makes you feel alive? What if addiction isn't weakness, but a sacred hunger misplaced in poison, disguised as peace? Why do some escape untouched while others, fully aware it's destroying them, still return again and again? Carl Jung understood what most of us won't admit: addiction isn't about drugs. It's about the soul. Why do some people walk away untouched while others who know exactly how much it's killing them keep returning to it night after night, like moths to a flame? Carl Jung, whose work laid the foundation for what we now call shadow work, saw what most of us refuse to admit. Addiction isn't just about substances or habits, it's about the soul. It's not merely a brain malfunction, a moral weakness, or a bad decision. At its root, addiction is spiritual starvation. A cry from the deepest part of you begging to feel whole in a world that keeps tearing you apart. And until we stop treating addiction as a personal failure and start listening to it as a message, we will keep missing the point. Carl Jung understood something that most modern psychologists hesitate to name. He saw that addiction is not just a habit to be broken, it's a symptom of something much deeper, a lost connection to meaning. It's not simply about dopamine dysfunction or trauma, though all of these play a role. At its core, addiction is what happens when the human spirit can no longer tolerate emptiness. When the soul is starved of truth, of purpose, of something greater than survival, it begins to reach blindly for anything that resembles relief. This isn't just about alcohol or drugs or gambling. This is about the internal abyss, the hollow space inside you that you try to silence with distraction, numbness, stimulation. The one that wakes up in the middle of the night and asks, "Is this all there is?" The one that doesn't speak in words but in cravings, obsessions, and self-destruction. From the outside, addiction looks like failure. She's weak. He lacks discipline. They brought this on themselves. But Carl Jung, whose teachings on shadow work, Revo, someone searching for God in all the wrong places. All addictions, Jung once said, are substitutes for legitimate suffering. Let that settle. Because addiction isn't the desire to escape responsibility. It's the urge to escape meaninglessness. It's what happens when your pain has no language and your suffering has no purpose. And when meaning collapses, even poison can start to feel like salvation. The addict is not someone too lazy to heal. They are someone too wounded to keep pretending. They are not afraid of pain. They are afraid of pain that carries no meaning. That's why they drink, gamble, scroll, or lose themselves in compulsions, not because these things solve the problem, but because for a fleeting moment, they make the pain tolerable. Because at least for that moment, the emptiness feels like something. From the outside, addiction invites quick judgment. It's easy to say they should know better or that they just need more self-control. But behind every addiction is not a weak-willed person. It is a human being struggling to survive in a world that has never truly seen them. Carl Jung understood that addiction is not a deviation from the human condition. It is the human condition exposed. It is what happens when the outer world becomes unbearable and the inner world falls silent. Addiction is not about weakness. It is about longing. It is about a soul searching for meaning in a life that forgot how to offer it. No one wakes up one day and decides, "I think I'll destroy my life." That's not how addiction begins. People become addicts not because they're reckless, but because at some point in their lives they were quietly conditioned to believe their pain didn't matter. They were told through silence, neglect, or shame that their suffering should be hidden, denied, or numbed into invisibility. Addiction is rarely about craving more. It's about yearning for something deeper, something they were never taught how to find. It's the body's way of begging for wholeness, the mind's way of fleeing inner chaos, and the soul's desperate cry, what Carl Jung would call the longing to be reunited with the self. The tragedy is, we often mistake the addiction for the enemy, when in fact it's the message, a signal, a flare in the dark. And as long as we keep treating the addiction instead of listening to what it's trying to say, we'll keep missing the point. The truth is, people aren't addicted to alcohol or cocaine. They're not truly addicted to porn, nicotine, sugar, or endless scrolling. What they're addicted to is relief, silence, numbness, that brief fleeting moment where the ache goes quiet and it feels just for a second like the hunger is gone. That's what makes addiction so dangerous. It doesn't look like destruction at first. It looks like medicine. But Jung saw it clearly. The addict isn't trying to escape life. The addict is trying to escape a life that has lost its soul. The substance isn't the core problem. It's a placeholder, a substitute for something sacred that went missing a long time ago. And until we name what was lost, we will keep repeating the cycle, over and over again. When we say someone is addicted, what we're really saying, without always realizing it, is that they've become attached to something not out of love, but out of fear. Not because it brings them joy, but because they're terrified of what life feels like without it. Addiction is almost never about the object itself. It's not about the bottle, the pill, the screen, or the fix. It's about the state of being it creates. And sometimes even the most toxic state can feel safer than the emotional chaos that lives just beneath the surface. Carl Jung was clear: people don't become addicted because they are broken. They become addicted because they are spiritually disconnected. Because the world taught them how to survive, but never how to connect. So the substance becomes a stand-in, a substitute for meaning, for belonging, for inner peace, and when that substance wears off, so does the illusion of safety. The tragedy is that many addicts never even realize what they're actually searching for. They think they're chasing relief. In reality, they're chasing home. They're not weak. They're just trying to fill something that was never meant to be filled with what this world offers. Because you can't fill a spiritual void with material solutions. You can try, many do, but it never lasts. Not until that person meets something greater than their craving. Something more grounding than their pain. Something real enough to awaken what's been forgotten within them. Until then, they'll keep reaching for the same fix and wondering why it never quite works. Jung believed that addiction is not a moral failure. It's a spiritual cry, a signal that something sacred is missing and the soul is still searching. Addiction is not a crime. It's not a character flaw. It is a failed spiritual quest. You are not drawn to destruction because you're evil. You're drawn to it because you're split in two. There's the version of you the world sees, the one who copes, who performs, who smiles through the pain. And then there's the other part, the quiet, knowing part that whispers, "This isn't who I really am." Addiction begins the moment you start betraying that deeper truth, and it doesn't end until you return to it. That's why Carl Jung said the cure for addiction is a spiritual experience, not church, not rituals, but a real encounter with something greater than your pain. Because if you never find that the bottle will feel like God, the hunger that sits at the root of addiction, it isn't physical. It's existential. It's that deep, aching sense that something's missing. And even worse, we've forgotten what it is we've lost. Jung believed that inside every person is a self, a core, a center that longs for wholeness and truth. But when the world demands masks, roles, and endless fragmentation, that self gets buried beneath performance. And addiction becomes the unconscious attempt to dig it back up. The problem is, the addict is just digging in the wrong place. They look for God in a bottle. They look for peace in a needle. They look for love in a screen, in a stranger, in a quick high. But none of these things can deliver what they're actually seeking, because all of them are shadows, cheap imitations of something sacred. And yet, the hunger remains holy. That's what most people miss. The addict isn't weak. The addict is honest. They're the one soul who refuses to live numb, the one person who can't keep lying to themselves. And when they finally reach that breaking point, when they can admit they are starving for something deeper, that's when the transformation begins, not from punishment, not from shame, but from finally coming home to what they always were. The danger isn't in wanting too much. The real danger is in settling for far too little. The addict isn't chasing more pleasure, they're pleading for something real, something true. The substance just happens to be the closest thing that numbs the ache of not having found it yet. But here's where it gets more difficult, more honest. Jung taught that what we're running from isn't out there, it's in here, inside. He called it the shadow, the parts of ourselves we fear, reject, and exile into the unconscious. Addiction isn't the enemy. The real enemy is the inner divide, the split self. You try to be strong, composed, perfect, polite, and in doing so you bury your rage, your grief, your shame. But what? But what you repress doesn't vanish. It festers. It waits. It lurks in the dark corners of your psyche, waiting to be revealed through shadow work. A process Carl Jung believed was essential for true healing. Slowly building pressure, until one day it breaks through in ways you don't recognize, in behaviors you can't control. That's why addicts often say it feels like something else takes over, as if they're being possessed. Because, in a very real sense, a disowned part of them is acting out. Not to destroy them, but to be seen. And until you confront that shadow, not punish it, not demonize it, but truly integrate it through the process of shadow work, you'll never find freedom. Jung made it clear the shadow isn't a monster. It's the truth we're too afraid to face. It's the pain we were told was unacceptable, the desires we were shamed for, the memories we buried just to survive. The shadow holds everything we've disowned, and until we learn to turn toward it with compassion, it will keep turning our lives inside out, one unhealed wound at a time. Over time, the parts of ourselves we've buried, our grief, our rage, our shame, don't disappear. They rot in the basement of the psyche. And when they can no longer be contained, they don't rise with language. They rise with behavior. In this light, addiction is not just a habit. It is the shadow speaking through action. It is the soul crying out, "If you won't listen to my sorrow, I'll scream it through destruction." But the shadow isn't evil. It's honest. It's the part of you that still feels even when the rest of you has gone numb. It doesn't want to ruin your life. It wants to be heard. And here's the paradox: until you turn and face your shadow, you'll keep believing the enemy is outside of you. The bottle, the drug, the screen, the dealer. But the real war is always internal. And the moment you approach that shadow, not with judgment or fear, but with curiosity, you step into the sacred, often painful, yet redemptive process of shadow work, as envisioned by Carl Jung. Not perfect, whole. And here's what no one really says out loud. The addict doesn't crave the high. They crave the silence that comes with it. They're not chasing pleasure. They're chasing pause. A moment of stillness in a world that won't stop screaming. They are drowning in a noise the rest of us have learned to normalize, the noise of pretending, of performing, of pleasing. And for one fleeting moment, the substance quiets it all. The anxiety, the shame, the masks. Everything just stops. But that moment is short, and the cost is brutal. Jung once said, "The soul will not be ignored. If you won't hear it in silence, it will scream through your addictions." Because addiction at its core is not an escape. It is an invitation. An invitation to stop running, to turn inward, to listen, to finally face the silence you've been avoiding your entire life. Relief. That's the word we almost never say out loud. But that's what addicts are truly chasing. Not chaos, not thrill, not oblivion, just relief. A brief break from the unrelenting war inside. A moment when the storm of shame, guilt, confusion, and unworthiness goes quiet. And that is the cruel genius of addiction. It offers silence only to sell it back to you at a higher price every single time. Jung would argue that the pursuit of relief isn't weakness, it's unmet spiritual hunger. The addict isn't trying to escape reality. They're trying to escape a false reality, one where they've been forced to suppress who they are just to be accepted, tolerated, or ignored in peace. What makes addiction so dangerous is not simply the substance, it's the invisibility of what the substance replaces. A longing for ritual, for connection, for peace. In a world that has stripped life of its sacred symbols, people are left starving for meaning. And so, the addict tries to recreate that meaning alone through a bottle, a pill, a screen. But no ritual done in secret can ever truly heal. Because what they need isn't more willpower. What they need is something sacred, something human, something that tells them they're not insane for craving silence, they're just searching for it in the wrong place. You've heard the phrase rock bottom. It's often used like a warning, a curse, a line no one wants to cross. But Jung saw it differently. Rock bottom, he believed, is not failure. It's a rite of passage. When everything collapses, when the distractions stop working, when no one buys your excuses anymore, something sacred begins, because now all that's left is truth. And in that raw, brutal stillness, something ancient begins to stir. Not your ego, not your coping strategies, not your therapist's checklist, and definitely not your parents' expectations, but you, the real you, the part that never left, the part that remembers why you came here. That's why Jung believed in the necessity of symbolic death, the death of the false identity, so that the true self can finally rise. Rock bottom isn't the end. It's not where your life falls apart. It's where the mask shatters. It's where every role you've ever played, the strong one, the broken one, the achiever, the martyr, finally crumbles under the weight of your unspoken truth. And while that collapse may feel like death, it's not. It's initiation. This is what the mystics called the dark night of the soul. Every myth, every ancient culture has spoken of it, the descent into chaos that must come before true transformation. What's dangerous is not hitting rock bottom. What's dangerous is hovering above it, for years numb, distracted, functioning on the surface, yet rotting underneath. Never fully falling, but never truly changing. Rock bottom is sacred, not because it's dramatic, but because it forces a decision: evolve or perish. Not physically, spiritually. Do I continue the performance, the lie, the slow self-abandonment, or do I finally surrender? And that surrender isn't to a religion, a doctrine, or a label. It's surrender to reality, to truth. And yes, truth is brutal, but it's also the only foundation strong enough to rebuild a life on. Everything else, every excuse, every distraction, every half-hearted attempt will eventually crack. We live in a world that worships noise over meaning. Stay busy, stay productive, stay medicated, stay distracted. But Jung saw through all of it. He once said that every neurosis, every compulsion, every panic, every addiction is simply a replacement for spiritual truth. You don't crave heroin. You crave wholeness. You crave redemption. You crave to feel fully alive without shame. And that's why your addiction, as dark as it seems, carries something sacred. Not because it should be celebrated, but because it points to the divine. You are not broken. You are on a path. But you must stop mistaking the substance for the destination. In a culture obsessed with progress and performance, we've lost sight of what addiction really is, the soul's cry for the sacred. Jung understood this in a way that modern psychology often fears to confront. He saw that beneath the addict's behavior is a misplaced yearning for transcendence. Not religion, not dogma, but a moment of oneness, a return to something eternal, a sacred silence where the ego dissolves and you remember who you are. The tragedy is that our culture offers no path back to this. So the addict tries to simulate it through chemicals, adrenaline, risk, pleasure, through anything that mimics that fleeting glimpse of wholeness. But like all false gods, these imitations take more than they give. The high fades, the void returns, and the shame doubles in its place. Addiction is a counterfeit initiation. It promises transcendence, but delivers fragmentation. It mimics the sacred journey, but leaves the soul more lost than ever. And yet, the longing remains. That ache at the center of every addict's life, that craving for something real, is not shameful. It's holy. It is the soul remembering what it means to feel alive. When we begin to see that the addict isn't chasing destruction, but chasing a spiritual homecoming, everything changes. We stop asking, what's wrong with them, and start asking, what sacred need went unmet? Until that question is answered, the cycle won't break. It will repeat over and over, louder each time. So what does real healing look like? It's not just discipline. It's not just abstinence. It's integration. Jung said, the gold is in the shadow, meaning the very parts of you you've tried to kill don't need to die. They need to be understood. Your anger carries a message. Your shame holds truth. Your cravings are not your enemy. They are the compass pointing you toward a part of yourself that got left behind. The real work isn't quitting. The real work is asking, why did I need this in the first place? What has my soul been trying to tell me that I refuse to hear? Integration doesn't mean erasing the parts of you that hurt. It means welcoming them back into the circle. Jung believed that healing wasn't about becoming good. It was about becoming whole through the lifelong path of shadow work and honest self-confrontation. Most addicts spend their lives trying to amputate pieces of themselves, the rage, the shame, the grief, believing that if they could just cut those parts out, they'd finally be free. But those rejected parts don't vanish. They scream through cravings. They bleed through relapses. They sabotage every step forward until they're finally acknowledged. Because the shadow doesn't just hold darkness, it holds potential. your creativity, your fire, your truth. All of it can get buried in the same place you buried your wounds. And when you begin to face that shadow with honesty instead of judgment, you don't just get sober, you get reborn. You stop identifying as the addict. You begin to see yourself as the one who survived, the one who endured, the one who stared into the abyss and lived to tell the truth. This is not about avoiding temptation forever. This is about becoming someone who no longer needs it. Because when you reclaim the parts of yourself that were once exiled, you become undivided. Jung believed that healing begins the moment the psyche finds a symbol. Not a slogan, not a motivational quote, but a living image, a dream, a vision, an archetype that reorders your entire sense of self. This is what happens in great myths, in ancient rituals, in true spiritual awakenings. The addict doesn't just stop drinking. He becomes someone else, not through willpower, but through surrender. By finally facing the parts of himself he buried. That is what transforms a person, not punishment, not fear, but meaning. Because the moment you realize your suffering has a purpose is the moment your healing begins. What makes a symbol powerful is not that it explains life, it's that it makes life worth living. Jung knew that true transformation is never purely intellectual. It's emotional, archetypal, symbolic. The addict doesn't heal by memorizing facts. They heal when they experience a moment, a breakdown, a dream, a vision so profound it reorients their entire identity. Suddenly, the pain has context. The suffering wasn't random, it was the fire that revealed the blueprint. And that blueprint often comes wrapped in story and image, in personal myth. Something that finally makes sense of the chaos. In every hero's journey there's a turning point, not when the hero defeats the dragon, but when he understands why he had to face it in the first place. For the addict, the dragon isn't the substance. It's the self-deception, the inner division, the refusal to feel. And the moment they stop running, the moment they meet the dragon's gaze, something ancient stirs. A new identity is born, not from success, but from surrender. And from that surrender comes the one thing no substance can ever replicate: meaning. Not borrowed meaning, not surface-level positivity. Personal, earned, embodied, meaning. Carl Jung, the father of shadow work and depth psychology, didn't believe in labeling people. He didn't call anyone a junkie or a lost cause. He believed that every addiction, no matter how dark, is a misunderstood myth waiting to be lived properly. You are not the hunger that haunts you. You are not the choices that once betrayed you. You are the quiet awareness beneath it, all the part of you that observes, that aches, that knows deep within life cannot stay this way. And if you find the courage to meet that truth head-on, not suppress it, not drown it, but truly face it, you begin a sacred journey few ever dare to walk. A journey not of escape, but of return to yourself. To reduce someone to an addict is to overlook their humanity, to mistake their pain for their identity. But Carl Jung rejected that notion entirely. He didn't see addicts as damaged goods. He saw them as souls in exile groping their way home in the dark. The person behind the addiction isn't ruined. They're lost in noise, starved of silence, disconnected from the compass within. And in that inner void, the craving speaks louder than any truth. But the moment the authentic self stirs even faintly, the illusion begins to unravel. Not because the substance has lost power, but because the person has remembered theirs. You are not your compulsions. You are not the shame stitched to your story. You are not the worst thing that's ever happened to you. You are the part of you that still hopes, still questions, still longs for more. And that longing, that inner rebellion against numbness is exactly what makes you dangerous. Because when you reclaim your voice, you don't just recover, you disrupt. You unlearn the lies. You stop bowing to fear. You stop shrinking for love. You stop betraying yourself just to be accepted. Because once you've tasted the truth, nothing artificial will ever satisfy you again, not even the addiction. Addiction is not a dead end. It's a coded message. A roadmap etched in darkness, quietly guiding you back toward the light. Jung believed that healing wasn't about becoming good. It was about becoming whole through the lifelong path of shadow work and honest self-confrontation. Dare to find meaning on your own terms. And when you do, the cravings lose their hold not because they vanish, but because you no longer need them. Because you remember who you are. And that version of you doesn't run anymore. The path out of addiction is not a return to the old self. It is a transformation into someone new. Not someone foreign, but someone you've always been meant to become. Jung believed true freedom isn't about resisting temptation. It's about no longer being ruled by it. Because healing isn't a straight line, it moves in spirals. You'll circle the same pain more than once, but with more clarity each time. And what once shattered you now shapes you. What once tempted you now teaches you. Not because the darkness disappeared, but because you finally understood what it had to say. Real freedom isn't immunity. It's authenticity. The awakened soul doesn't seek perfection. It seeks presence. It no longer fears the quiet. It finds wisdom in it. It no longer chases the high. It finds beauty in simplicity. And it stops waiting for salvation because it has begun building a life that doesn't need escape. This isn't just recovery. It's mythic return. To heal from addiction is to reclaim your role in the human epic. The one who fell faced the abyss and rose not flawless, but whole. Thank you for watching.